Either way,
Yeah.
I love my boy Jameson Williams at Houston. So I'm pumped for Jameson Williams season to be back. I've missed the weekly thrill ride of either 30-point games or 1-point games. But alas, in the 3-game stretch before his suspension, Jared Goff was averaging 13 yards per attempt. In the 2 games Jameson Williams missed, that dropped to 6 yards per attempt. Meanwhile, the Texans have been very generous to wide receivers lately, giving up the 8th most fantasy points to the position over the past 2 weeks, including 181 yards and 3 scores to the Jets secondary just in the second half of last week. Motor City Dan Campbell seems to be fired up to get Williams rolling, saying he's been in the facility, he's been training, he's been in meetings, and he's ready to go. So with the Lions leaning on the run game recently, I think Williams could be a key to bringing back that explosive playmaking. And I'm going to call 3 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown against Houston. That's Jameson Williams football, baby.
Anyways, Raj, take it away with your first love, with your loves for the week. Go ahead.
I shall take it away with Jauan Jennings as my first love this week versus the repeat offenders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It feels like we're picking on them all the time. But the last time Jennings played, when one of either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk was out, he played 85% of the snaps, had 11 catches, 175 yards, and 3 TDs. He is slated to return from injury this week, and Ayuk is out for the rest of the year. And best of all, he gets a prime matchup against the Buccaneers, who feature the worst passing defense against receivers and quarterbacks, be it during the season or the last 2 weeks. And we obviously just saw what Mahomes and DeAndre Hopkins did to the Bucs defense. And I think Jennings will be in a prime spot to be deployed in a similar fashion, the way Hopkins was either in the slot or out wide. So I would fire him up against a reeling secondary.
I'm going to go with a rookie this week. I'm going to go with Odunze versus the Patriots. He's seeing more and more targets, 6 in week 8, 7 in week 9. So looks like he's gaining more and more chemistry with Caleb Williams. Now he topped 100 yards for the first time since week 3, but still has not found the end zone since week 3 as well. So with DJ Moore likely seeing a lot of Gonzalez on Sunday, I think that frees up Odunze. And the Patriots are giving up the 10th most points to wide receivers. So I think it's a great spot for Rome. And I believe he finally finds the end zone again in week 10.
Nacc, who's your second love for the week?
I'm gonna go with a guy who was out most of the year. Just came back last week, Mr. T.J. Hockenson at Jacksonville. He saw 45% of the snaps in his first game back from a torn ACL, and he actually looked really good. Did not look out of place at all. He saw 4 targets and made 3 catches for 27 yards, so nothing crazy fantasy related. But I don't think it was expected to overproduce in his first game back. And he gets a Jaguars team in week 10, giving up the 10th most points to tight ends. So I feel like I'm looking for a lot more snaps on Sunday, and also gets into the end zone for a score. The offense looked different with him out there. They got another weapon, and as you know, they get to continue try to keep up with Detroit in the NFC North. So I think it's great timing to get that weapon. And I don't know, there was a different feeling about them last week, and I think look, he's just going to be on the field more and more.
Joe Burrow threw for 5 TDs last week, and not 1 but 2 went to Mike Gesicki. He's been the number 2 in that offense when T has been out. And in the 4 games without Higgins this year, he's averaging 15 fantasy points per game. Just in the last 2 weeks, he's averaging about a 20% target share. 2 straight games of 5 receptions, 70 receiving yards at least. Baltimore are not a very favorable matchup versus tight ends. I think they're giving up the 11th most fantasy points per game, but they are giving up a heck of a lot more to QBs and have surrendered double-digit fantasy points to tight ends in 3 of the last 4 games. Give me Gesicki as a tight end 1 this week. You can start him with supreme confidence. My second love for the week is Tyrone, Tracy Jr. versus Carolina in good old London town. So there's not really much to say. It's a great matchup, and he's in a great spot to go absolutely nuclear. The last 4 weeks, Tyrone is RB12 on the season and went up against some pretty tough defenses too. We all got chewed out a few weeks ago when we expect him to struggle versus Pittsburgh D, and he had a very good game. So he's in full command of that backfield despite
Raj?
Singletary.
Yeah, it was me.
That was Raj, yeah. He's a full command of that backfield despite Singletary being back and healthy again. Carolina is giving up the most fantasy points to running backs, the most yards, the most touchdowns, the most everything. I expect Tyrone to get, honestly, at least 20 points. I'm calling it. I wouldn't be surprised if he hits a 30 burger. You start him and you...
Wait, let me just...
So Tyrone Tracy versus
Give it and take
Carolina.
it.
If you have Tyrone Tracy Jr. in your lineups on your bench, you start him this week.
I do,
Honestly,
thank you.
It's way too good to pass up of a matchup.
I have as my first hate Calvin Ridley versus the Chargers. So the Chargers defense has been on a roll and have allowed 10 and 8 points in their past 2 games against, albeit, the Saints and Browns. And then they get the Titans, who should be getting our boy Will Levis back at QB, who is scheduled to be the starter again. If you look at these splits, with Levis at QB, Ridley is averaging 7.6 fantasy points per game in 5 games. With Rudolph at QB, Ridley is averaging 15 fantasy points per game in 3 games. Additionally, the Chargers are allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. They're looking like a legit team on both sides of the ball, and they have a hefty ball control strategy, which I think opportunities will be scarce for Levis and the Titans offense. So I would definitely sit Calvin Ridley this week. Yeah, my second hate of the week, pains me to say, Caleb Williams versus the Patriots. And I would say there's nothing about the Patriots defense that screams world beaters in their current slate. It's just that the Bears' vibes are really terrible right now. Caleb's gone 2 straight weeks without a touchdown. He's completed only 55% of his passes, if not less, and he's taken 9 sacks in the process. The offensive line isn't giving him a chance. He's hesitating to throw to open targets. And obviously, as we know, the play calling keeps abandoning the run way too early. The Patriots defense has been scrappy, ranked 15th in fantasy points allowed to QBs over the past 2 weeks. But to me, the Bears players are having players only meetings, asking for coaching accountability. And when it rains, it pours. And I would avoid Williams until the Bears and he show way more signs of life.
Speaking of tough spots, who do you have on your hate column this week?
Yeah, so I'm going to go for another one on Thursday Night Football. It's going to be the aforementioned Chase Brown. Was a league winner for all of 12 hours before the Bengals acquired Khalil Herbert from the Bears. He's been very effective this season, and he just put up 27 points without Zach Moss last week. But that was versus a very, very bad Raiders team. In week 10, he plays a tough division opponent in the Baltimore Ravens on Thursday night, and they're giving up the 7th fewest points to running backs in 2024. I can easily see him struggle in a game where the Bengals may have to rely a lot on the pass.
I don't disagree with this. Yeah, it's going to be a very tough sledding for Chase Brown.
But it's going to be Jaden Daniels versus the Steelers. Mike Tomlin is 25-6 versus the rookie QBs in his career as a head coach. So Daniels rebounded in week 9 versus the Giants after he saved his fantasy day in week 8 versus Chicago on that final Hail Mary play, or he would have finished with, I believe, something along the lines of 13 points. The Steelers are also very stingy to opposing QBs, giving up the 3rd fewest points. And they've played very well versus Lamar Jackson, limiting him in, I don't think Lamar Jackson has a win against the Steelers. So he's a similar style to Daniels, the running style, the ones that, take off and go. So I think they're going to have a good game plan for him. So I think Daniels struggles on Sunday.
The Steelers have only allowed one quarterback to hit 20 fantasy points so far this year. My 2 hates for this week, Jake Ferguson versus Philly. So coming off a 10 target game where he put up a very decent line, Jake and the morally destroyed Cowboys go up against a surging Philadelphia defense, who are 29th versus tight ends, which is very no bueno for Mr. Ferguson. Philly hasn't surrendered a passing tee to tight ends all season, and none of them have passed at least 73 yards. Jake will now be receiving passes from Cooper Rush, who was completing just barely 50% of its passes in the little action he saw this week. Ideally, I'd sit Jake this week, but with some big name tight ends on bye like Bowers and Njoku and Tucker Kraft, you might not have many options. He's a big fade for me this week. I think he finishes outside the top 12 in tight ends.
Man, disappointing season for him, I find, this year.
Especially with the lack of options.
The Cowboys in general are just my second hate of the week is Drake May at Chicago. So we're gonna double up on Chicago. We're gonna go double or nothing right now on QBs that are facing Chicago. Last week they stifled the likes of Kyler Murray and just came off back-to-back games of 20 plus fantasy points. And I think they will do the same to Drake May. Drake has been very good, but he's also had the luxury of facing very soft QB defenses. Small sample size, but the splits so far are pretty legit. Houston in week 6, he got 24.5 fantasy points. Jacksonville 22.8. The Jets, he was injured that game. He still got 11.5 fantasy points, and versus last week against Tennessee, 18.75. So he's been putting up some very solid numbers in the last 4 weeks. But I think this is easily his toughest matchup that Drake will face or has to face so far this season. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to bet against this rookie finishing as a top 20 quarterback. Chicago defense, they're very good.